Want to know why? Ask how. Howard the Humongous. Why is QAnon so seductive? Why does it totally resculpt the emotional landscape of people from Tyler, Texas to Tokyo? Why does it change the way people see reality? Why is QAnon as addictive as cocaine? And why does it appear to be the fastest growing religion, the cult, in America? Why is it giving headline prominence to one of its believers, Congresswoman Marjorie Greene? Because humans don't go wild with anger against enemies that aren't human. Enemies like the coronavirus behind COVID-19. It is hard to get furious at a virus. It is hard to ladle out blame and to rouse righteous indignation against a megamolecule. There's a reason. We are biologically built to blame our problems on other human beings. Real flesh and blood folk with 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, and a head. We are also biologically structured to solve our problems by hating groups of our fellow human beings. We are biologically wired to see the leaders that head those groups as bad guys, and we are biologically built to despise their followers. To explain how blame is built into our biology, let me tell you the story of one of my favorite experiments, the 7 rats on a hot plate. The time was 1939, the year that Hitler invaded Poland and started World War II. Neil Miller and John Dollard at Yale had proposed their frustration-aggression hypothesis, and they'd apparently proved it. What is the Dollard and Miller frustration-aggression hypothesis? The frustration-aggression hypothesis proposes that when you hit a lab rat with frustration, the rat will turn its frustration into aggression. Deprive the rat of something it is accustomed to receiving, and it will get pissed off. When frustration-aggression theory was tested in roughly 1950, the theory bore up brilliantly. Here's one of the tests. You put a rat in a bowling alley-like straight maze with food at the other end. The rat runs enthusiastically toward the food. Once you've run the experiment a dozen times or so, the rat gets used to this tasty experience. Then, if you put an electrified grid in front of the food, the poor rat runs down the straightaway with enthusiasm. But when his pink and naked front feet are shocked by the grid, he stops in his tracks. How do we know the rat is experiencing something akin to human frustration? And where does the frustration-aggression hypothesis enter the picture? Here's where. If you put either another rat or a bottle brush that looks like a rat near the site of the rat's electric shock, the pained rat will beat the bejesus out of the fluffy target. That's frustration leading to aggression. The rat needs another rat, or something that looks like another rat, on which to take out its rage. Its rage at being stymied and hurt. But does the frustration-aggression hypothesis also work in human beings? In 1940, Carl Hovland and Robert Sears tried out the frustration-aggression hypothesis on us Homo sapiens in a big way. They hypothesized that when cotton prices went down in the South and farmers were prevented from earning the income they were accustomed to, the Southern farmers would find other humans to blame their problems on. Those other humans would be folks below them in the pecking order, African Americans. The scientists' guess was that frustration would lead to aggression, so lynchings would go up. Hovland and Sears went through the cotton prices from 1882 to 1930, and Dollard and Miller's hypothesis, the frustration-aggression hypothesis, panned out totally. When cotton prices went down, the number of blacks swinging from trees with a noose around their necks went up. Frustration leads to aggression in humans. Score 2 for Dollard and Miller's insight into the biology of blame, and Dollard and Miller's peephole into the forces of history. Then in 1962, Roger Ulrich and Nathan Azrin at Southern Illinois University and Illinois Wesleyan University tried another variant on the rat experiment, a variant with even more to say about politics and the forces of history than the rat and its mini bowling alley lane. The experimenters put 7 rats on an electrified grid and turned up the juice. In essence, they put 7 rats on a hot plate and turned up the heat. What did the rats do? How did they handle their pain? They went through what microbiologists call quorum sensing. The 6 strongest rats sensed who they were, formed an instant gang, and beat the stuffing out of the weakest rat on the grid. Yes, the 6 strongest rats found a scapegoat. They found another rat they could blame their problems on. So the biology of blame does not just control individual rats. It's important to rats in groups. And that's one of the future secrets of QAnon. There's one more thing. Another train of research discovered something the scientists called altruistic punishment. A ridiculously waffly term. But here's what it means. Humans and animals are constantly on the prowl for other creatures who have broken the laws of the group. And we get pleasure from punishing those miscreants. When we find a scapegoat we can blame things on, we get a high from battering the poor rat or the poor human who has slipped out of line. We get a high from hating the poor soul we've decided to beat up on. We get a high of dopamine in the ventrotegmental area, the striatum, and the anterior cingulate cortex of the brain. And dopamine in those brain centers is what drugs like cocaine give us. In other words, having someone to hate is a pleasure built into our biology. Righteous indignation is like a cocaine high. That's another of QAnon's secrets. But why would such a perverse twist of biology exist? Our brain uses the pleasure of blame to structure our groups. It drives us to accomplish what the rats achieved on the hot plate once they'd picked out their scapegoat. They bound together in a common cause. More specifically, the pleasure of blame, the pleasure of beating up the little guy, binds us together in pecking orders. It binds us together in status hierarchies. In case you're not familiar with a pecking order, here's how a pecking order works. There's a top chicken. Let's call her chicken number 1. Chicken number 1 gets to go first in the line to the feeding trough. And chicken number 1 has another privilege. She can peck every other chicken in the group. She can get her jollies by taking out her frustrations on any other chicken she wants. To put it differently, she can have the pleasure of putting every other chicken in the farmyard in her place. Chicken number 2 goes next to the food trough. She can peck every other chicken in the farmyard with one exception. She is not allowed to peck at chicken number 1. Chicken number 3 gets to peck at every chicken below her on the pecking order, but she is not allowed to peck at chickens number 1 and number 2. And chicken number 4 gets to peck at every other chicken, with the exception of chickens number 1, 2, and 3. Finally, there is the bottom chicken, an unfortunate chicken who cannot peck any other chicken in the yard. Not a single solitary one. The bottom chicken is the scapegoat. The chicken other chickens can blame for everything. The chicken every other chicken can peck on. In this system, the anger roused by frustration tumbles down the hierarchical ladder like a slinky going down a staircase. And guess what? It gives the group a backbone. It gives the group a structure. It knits the group together into a primitive superorganism. It knits them together into a larger whole that uses each chicken in the yard the way your visual system uses the cells in your eyes to read this word. Then there's something else at work in QAnon and in the Marjorie Taylor Greene phenomenon. Yes, human groups use aggression to keep their hierarchies intact. But human groups also use collective frustration and aggression for something else. They use it for unity. And that unity comes in handy in the competition between groups. Why? Because groups compete for status just like individual chickens do. Groups compete for standing in, guess what? The pecking order of groups. Yes, groups compete to be number 1 or number 2. And they compete not to be the group at the bottom. Right now, you see it the way America is being challenged for top position in the pecking order of groups by China. The way the scientific community and its hypotheses are being challenged for the right to declare what's true by QAnon and its conspiracy theories. That competition between the scientific community and the conspiratorial communities is another competition for top position in the pecking order of groups. The pecking order of groups and the pleasures of blame are the reasons that politics gives permission to hate. Politics tells us who it is permissible to unload our aggressions on. In fact, groups identify themselves by who they loathe. They identify themselves by who they mock, ridicule, and attack. Liberals gain their solidarity by hating conservatives. Conservatives feel the thrill of oneness when they put down liberals. Democrats hate Donald Trump. Republicans hate Democrats. And many of us feel animosity toward China, toward Russia, and toward Iran, 3 countries in which leaders and citizens get their jollies by hating guess who? Us. The Iranians even throw street demonstrations in which their main chant is "Death to America." And guess what? We get pleasure from ranking on those we hate. Every headline reeking with righteous indignation against a rival group or a scapegoat gives us pleasure. It juices us with the ferocious joy of a dopamine high. It gives that high even to Iranians chanting "Death to America." So why is QAnon catching on as a heady, exhilarating new cult? And why does it seem capable of explaining everything? Because it identifies the rat on the hot plate that's become the new scapegoat. It's identified the someone to blame. It's fingered an enemy to hate. It's pointed the finger at a group whose members we can all peck at. The QAnon enemy is an imagined global elite that supposedly revels in raping children, holding satanic rituals, and even eating children. The elite that QAnon hates contains just about every liberal celebrity in Hollywood, nearly every star in the Democratic Party, including Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, and Chuck Schumer, and God knows what global bankers. It even includes me. Then there's the silent organizer around whom the QAnon cult says this alleged conspiracy flows, George Soros. George Soros, the billionaire investor and philanthropist, comes conveniently from a group that's been used as the weakest rat on the hot plate since anti-Semitism was invented in Egypt's capital city of Alexandria 2,200 years ago. All of this about this elite is fantasy. All of it is a lie, despite an occasional glimmer of truth. But it sells. It's viral. To many, it's irresistible. Why? It gives us the pleasure of blame. It feeds us the dopamine highs. So, by the way, does hating QAnon and pointing out QAnon's lies. Does the QAnon theory explain anything in the real world? It certainly tries. For example, it claims to explain COVID. COVID, it says, is a bioweapon the child rapers came up with to subjugate the world. COVID, it says, is a bioweapon designed to subjugate you and me. Oh, and COVID is also a hoax. Says QAnon, COVID is an excuse to get you and me to wear the mark of the beast, face masks. It's an excuse to get you and me to jail ourselves, to lock ourselves up in our own homes. COVID, says QAnon, is an excuse to get us to practice the habits of a totalitarian state. Again, the elite that QAnon has pinpointed to does not exist. George Soros and Nancy Pelosi do not rape children. They do not worship Satan. They probably don't even know each other. But by imagining this fictional elite and preaching its supposed machinations as truth, QAnon gives its followers permission to hate. It gives its followers a human group to loathe instead of an invisible virus. It singles out the weakest rat on the hot plate, and it gives us the dopamine high of taking out our frustrations on another group of human beings, a group of human beings who can't fight back because they don't exist. This is Howard Bloom, speaking to you from the future. It's your job and my job to make. Or, want to know why? Ask how. And now for that sleazy, slimy, seditious, sibilant, sneaky little off button.